Hey everyone, Christopher Ruocchio here of Sun Eater, and man, the camera is a wider angle than it is usually, so you can see my calendar. That's cool. Anyway, good to see you all here. I have no idea why this happened. Very disorienting. Let's just try to change that a little bit. Okay. Good to see everybody. Todd, Orion, Awesome Possum, Corey, THXLBX, Galahad, Joe, Ross, everybody, good to see you. Good to see you. Man, it is November already. This year's moving too fast, or Book 7 is moving too slow. One of the two. Probably that latter one. Yeah, cinematic view, widescreen. Somebody, Ridley Scott heard I was bullying him, I guess. Yeah. A paper calendar? Yeah, a paper calendar. I don't know why you would be disappointed. This should not be a surprise. I am as analog as humanly possible, which is honestly not very, but I'm gonna do my best. Yeah. So, yeah, good to see everybody. Yeah, working on book 7. It is not going as quickly as I would like. I am on chapter 65 of 86 at the moment, so we're getting close. Things are getting pretty real. I had a bit of a Milanese knot situation the last month or so that I've been working my way through. But as Prime Legacy here notes, it was actually, once I figured out what to do about it, it was very fun because the solution, I think, is very, very, very cool. So I think, I hope that everybody will like it. And you'll have to figure out what part of it part of the book it is when you get there, but it is moving, which is good. That's the important thing. I need to finish it by the end of February, where there will be delays, and we're getting close because the book is way too long. And by finished, I mean like to the editor for revisions. Yeah. Ben, hey Ben, says start a petition for you to keep in as many words as you'd like. It's not as many words as I would like, is actually as few as possible, is the thing, right? The thing that sucks, right, is when I get to the cutting phase and we end up cutting, 40, 50, 60,000 words. It's like a month and a half. It's like 6 weeks of my life I like wished that I wouldn't have had to have worked, right? So like actually you want to write as little as possible. There's an old adage. My dad's an engineer. My grandfather is an engineer, which is, of course, why this happened to me. Anybody can build a bridge, but it takes an engineer to build a bridge that can just barely stand. I think it's true of books too. Is why I say when I'm talking about like Gene Wolfe, I think that Gene Wolfe is a writer who like if you take any words out of his book, it makes the book worse. I think the book should be as short as possible to make it, its most powerful platonic self. So, the thing about the cut content though, Stephen, is that it's usually like a sentence here or there, right? It's what it is like rambling and gas more than it is anything else. I think some people have commented on how Disquiet Gods feels a lot more concise and a lot tighter, and that's because we did that and we didn't do that before. Yeah. Any word on whether Butler will be editing Shadows Upon Time? That is the plan. Dawes thinking about that. So let's see. Max says, I got the 6 Sun Eater main books. I want to binge them before the last one is released. How much time do I have? About a year, approximately. Yeah. So yeah, we're feeling better. Thanks, Blemries. Good to see you again. Halfway through Demon and White, loving the journey. Awesome. Shane, will there be ebook versions of the Diamond Editions for Howling Dark onward, like EOS? So I want to be really clear about that ebook. It is just the new material. It is just the new short story. It is just the new intro, and it is the art pictures. As for whether we'll do them going forward, I think the answer actually is going to be no. Because everybody who backed the campaign got it, but like the people who bought in just for that, there were like 5. So it might not be worth the effort, frankly. And those stories are going to get put into future Tales of the Sun Eater volumes pretty soon anyway. So if you're somebody else and you like want to get that story, like it will be coming. I mean, when we were putting the first one together, I wasn't quite sure if the Tales stuff was going to continue or not, but like I at this point am just going to do as many Tales of the Sun Eater volumes as possible. Yeah. So that'll probably be what happens. Is we'll just move the stories into new Tales volumes. All the stories will also be getting the omnibus treatment here pretty soon. We'll have that to look forward to. The first volume of stories they'll probably end up being 2 volumes of Sun Eater stories by the time we're done with the special editions, because the Andorita ones and the Biden editions have stories. And I'm still writing new stories. The first thing I got to do after book 7 is go back and write like an early Red Company story for an anthology. So that'll be time warpy. But we'll keep doing them. So the first omnibus will probably come into being shortly after book 7. That'll be one of my projects. Broken Binding sets came in. Yeah, they're incredible. Thank you. Yeah, they're great. I have a set got direct from the printer, which is cool. They're unsigned, which I don't plan to sign them because all of the other ones are. So I think that's fun. But they're doing great. Patrick and I have we've got the Roman friezes, the inside dust jackets done for 4 and 5 already, and they are pretty awesome. Peng Lu did a great job on those. There's going to be a second printing of the Broken Binding editions starting December 9th, I believe. I think they'll have 2,500 for sale then, and then another 2,500 will go on sale in February. That'll be, I think, all of them. That'll be the end. But those will all ship in April. So if you order now, you're just it's a little early. It'll be a couple months before they get the rest of those there. I have begged them to please send me the signature pages tomorrow, so that I can start that now, because got stuff to do. I need as much time to do those as possible, because 15,000 is a lot worse. Is a lot worse than 9. So it'll be a challenge. Albert, good to see you, man. How do legionary families get paid given the cryonically extended service? Is trafficking a problem for the Imperium? Trafficking is certainly a problem for the Imperium. There's a story called Parliament of Owls that is in part a human trafficking story. But as far as how they get paid, usually what happens is the families get paid like in advance for whatever the agreed upon term is. You have to remember that the currency that the peasants use is mostly monopoly money. It's not the sort of thing that has like serious buying power, like starship buying power. The sort of gold specie of the Imperium is sort of tokens for the peasantry. There's sort of a 2-tiered economy, and the digital mark, right? You can think of it as almost, in a way, obviously, like I was thinking about this before Bitcoin was really something people were thinking about, but you can think of it as sort of a standard currency versus something like Bitcoin analogy, except that the standard currency is the one that's sort of looked at more askance by serious people than the reverse. It's a little outside my area of expertise. Also, if you hear an infant in the background, it is bedtime. My wife handles bedtime on streaming days. God bless her. So if you hear any crying, I just heard a little bit. I think that means she's probably going down. But we'll see how it goes. Anyway, have I seen Dune Prophecy? Yeah, like half of it. I wasn't super thrilled. I don't want to like go too much into it, but I let's say I thought the sets and the art direction were still very, very nice. And leave it there. It's nice to see Mark Strong. But I was surprised it's not an adaptation of Sisterhood of Dune like I thought. It's a sequel to that trilogy. Which I think those are where I stopped. I've read all the Butler and Jihad books. I read the House books. But I think I started Sisterhood and decided that I was not going to continue. Let's see. Started a video earlier. Dude said Sun Eater was top of his TBR. That is awesome. New fan here. Welcome, Drago. Empire of Silence, Lesser Devil question. Did I write for personal experience for the relationship between Crispin and Hadrian felt very real? Look, maybe only in like the broadest sense. I think it's a pretty common experience for you to realign your relationships when you're with your family when you grow up. And my like I am a very disagreeable person. But I had a pretty disagreeable relationship with one of my brothers. I have two brothers. Sort of growing up, and maybe there's some of that there, right? Because like now we're like super cool. And partly it's like a failure of empathy, like on both of our parts, but certainly on mine. Like I just didn't like stop to think like what it was like being my brother, right? And like who does, right? And maybe like people should do more of that. And so like the fact that Crispin and Hadrian just dramatically like don't understand each other, I think is maybe part of it. But like there's also a bit of a Thor Loki thing with Hadrian and Crispin as well, in the Marvel sense. I think that might have been part of it as well early on. That being said, my brother is like not like Crispin at all, or I'm not particularly like Hadrian either. Really. So it's hard to know exactly. Stephen Lynn, I might believe in fairies podcast episode with you, Nicholas, and Richard Olin was great. Yeah, that was fun. Aaron Erber has his podcast, I Might Believe in Fairies. He had me on with Nicholas Kotar, who's been on the channel before, and Richard Rowland from Symbolic World. And we talked about magic systems, which all four of us dislike. Just the idea of the modern magic system is not our flavor of fantasy for sure. I increasingly am not sure I buy into the hard magic, soft magic dichotomy at all. I think it's the wrong way of thinking about it. Something I need to sort of sit down and think through, especially if I'm going to start, writing on the magic side of the aisle. But we'll see how it goes. Travis just finished Tales 1, and your short stories fit your universe really well. Glad you plan to keep expanding it with those. Yeah, no, they're really fun. I love writing short stories. It's they're a lot more sort of biochemically rewarding, right? You get the dopamine hit from finishing the story a lot sooner. Like case in point, book 7 I've been working on now officially for a year and a week, which is the longest it's beaten Disquiet Gods. Disquiet Gods was 288 days. So we are now over a year. I did have a couple gaps where I had to stop for like a month at a time and work on other things. So it's not exactly a fair comparison, but I think even controlling for the 2 or 3 months of downtime I've had across the course of book 7, it's the longest I've been working on any one of these projects. So yeah. Any news about the Howling Dark Diamond Edition? Yes. We had a couple of delays. The cover art was not dimensioned properly, so it didn't fit into the template for the jacket. So we've lost a little time because James has to go back and adjust that for us, which he's doing right now, very graciously. And we're getting so close to Christmas, it seems immoral, I think, to ask you all to spend money on a book that we're not going to deliver for months on top of your Christmas spending. So Steve and I are probably going to push it to late January. For the pre-orders to start. That'll give the artists a little bit more time because poor John Valoran has vision problems as well, and he's pushing through. The work he's doing for the interior is so good. I'm really glad to be working with John. He's awesome. Taryn was great, but John and I at this point have worked together on more and for longer. And so I really enjoyed working with John as a person, and James too. Man, like it's gonna be next level. I've been through a couple of the art sponsors already. I need to revisit some of the old ones and make sure they want to come back if they want to come back. We got I think 3 slots left to fill for art. But the interiors are running a little bit behind as well. And I also, frankly, like I am not able to work on the Howling Dark interior revisions yet, and I might not be for until book 7's done. That'll be the first thing I need to catch up on. But I got to chapter like 57, and I have not been able to work on it in weeks. I've just had a really hard time with Shadows Upon Time, and you all know like that's my priority. Like that's the thing. Like I will always do the book ahead of other things, unless I can't. Right. So the last month has been mostly, if I'm not writing, I've been in the garage packing Diamond editions, which we're basically done. All the books are out except for the last 3, which should be out this week. talking about like filling out waitlisters and things like that. And then we had some like straggly stuff with like the ebook has to get sorted out. That'll be on its way very soon. And then we'll have everything wrapped up. We should be basically done by the end of the month. Certainly by the time I go to Utah next month for Dragonsteel. Madison, I'm sorry. I just finished Kingdoms of Death. Yes, it is. It's a bad day for sure. The extra art cards were a nice touch to the Diamond editions, by the way. Yeah, I don't know which one. So yeah, there were the postcards. We promised those part of the campaign. The bookmarks were a freebie. We just decided to throw in there, and then the I also had like random extra stuff floating around that I thought I'd pass on out. But yeah, no, the postcards really turned out nice. I love that printer. I use them for all of my like my business cards and things. They just do a lovely job. Am I on the hook for the signatures? Yes, I am on the hook. It's funny. Yeah, I begged Petrick to go down to just 2 books at a time for the rest of the series. We'll do 4, 5, and then 6, 7 the year after to save my hand. And then they added 5,000 more. But it's it's a good problem to have. I just hope I have a little more time. I had to sign the first 10,000 pages in 9 days, and that really, really, really sucked. So, yeah. Is there an approximation on when the arc for book 7 will be available in NetGalley or somewhere? No, I don't know. I imagine it to be sometime after. It'll be sometime like summer next year at the earliest. It's hard to know for sure. But that'd be the earliest guess. Prime Legacy, the intro letter in Empire of Silence Diamond Edition has implications for the future of the series. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Is the Knight Captain's view of Mad Marlowe standard for the run-of-the-mill guys in the channel? Like, yeah, pretty much. You notice he never refers to himself in this way. Is there a way to get the Diamond Edition cover art? I would love to get that hanging on the wall. We are hoping to get some poster prints, working out something with James for that on the website here soon. We also just have spare dust jackets for sale if you like want to get one. I think, have I posted that link yet? I think Jenna's posted it in like the Discord server, but we have like a lot of extra ones, and I figure like they won't fit the standard DAW book at all. The DAW book is fatter. Steve went a little small on the font size. Something we're gonna fix in book 2. We're gonna bump the font size up because it's too small. It's one of those things that's like was hard for me to notice until it was physically in front of me, and by then it was printed and it was too late. So it won't fit the DAW edition. But if you'd like a jacket just to have, you can get those. Get those too. Casey, what's up, man? Turn Dune Prophecy off after maybe 10 minutes. Yeah. The big thing, it was cool to see. Like, I know like people sort of bag on all the Kevin and Brian stuff. I kind of like the Butlerian Jihad books. All right, they're not what Frank describes as the Jihad of all, but they're pretty good as their own thing. And it was cool to see like sort of the Dune version of the Skynet Wars and stuff, right? But but then all the voiceover was killing me. It was not. That's too much voiceover, and it was not very compelling. So that was the big thing that sort of put me off really fast. There was some pretty good camera work. I'll give them that though. But the Penguin, it was not. I'll wait to see if people's opinions radically change. But writing question, if I don't mind. During the outlining process, how do I address a problem when you have a main character who needs to be doing multiple things in multiple places at the same time? So it's like a logistical issue. Like you've come up with a scenario and you've reached a point where you have a problem because you need the character to be doing 2 things at the same time. Not like the character can bilocate magically or something. That's tricky, and it kind of depends on the situation, right? It may be that you need to find another character who can do the thing. You may need to invent another character to do another thing. And the thing you should think about is like, think about it as an opportunity and not a problem, right? This doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? And how can I solve it in a way that makes the story better? And often introducing a new character, or maybe consolidating the action a little bit. Maybe you don't need that other thing, right? Maybe you do a third thing instead. Break the frame, because the problem is you're stuck looking at this binary issue. You have to get the character to do two things, and those two things have to happen at the same time. They can't happen at the same time, right? Unless there's some quantum superposition magic stuff going on, right? So that can't work, right? Throw that away, solve the problem differently, right? Ways like introducing new characters or something. And sometimes it pays to go really out of the box, right? And introduce something completely new and like completely different that solves the problem, but also is interesting in its own right. Because the way you keep things from feeling tacked in is by putting the thing that you tack in, having the thing that you tack in be really interesting. Then it's okay, right? That's a way to think about it. But think about just step back from the problem completely. Don't try to solve it the way you've been solving it. Solve it with a new solution. In short, that's what I would do. If I was forced to live on a planet in my setting, what would I choose? Probably Forum, because it's inside all the time. But and the one under my feet, Jad would not be bad. So, yeah. Regarding Murdered Son, I don't think they have. I think I was sort of confused. I think that they were just sort of taking like interest basically and not doing formal pre-orders when they put the cover out. I think I just sort of got, confused. So I think just give them a little more time. Gonna, yeah, Ross. My family is they always come. They always come to my local signings. The first signing was basically, it was entirely people I knew, and like one one poor girl who did not know that she'd walked into my life reunion party, but who was very glad to be there. And it sort of changed since, right? But like my family's still there. My in-laws come now too, and and my wife hams it up from the front row. But yeah, that was cool. Dara, I'm the oldest brother. Hey Christopher, huge fan. Love the idea for Lutheran Society to have other ideas for dystopian political ideologies. Not for the story. That was the only one that was really called for. Unless, of course, you stretch, like in a certain sense, right? Like, the thing about utopias, right, is that they don't exist. Right, they can't exist definitionally, or etymologically, right? Like utopia means nowhere, and the dystopia sort of emerges out of this idea, right? And it also is a place that doesn't really exist. And so I sort of think, I try to think of basically every society in the universe as just a normal place, right? But they're also like all like as in real places, right? The problem with any philosophy is that it has to be embodied, right, in the world in some way. And like the Platonists are wrong. There isn't a magical special triangle somewhere, right, that transcends all triangles exactly, right, in sort of a a category sense. Right, like ideas have to be incarnated in material, and when you incarnate something, like in the case of the Lothrians, communism, or in the case of the empire, right, sort of monarcho-feudalism, because it's got a bit of both, right, or the sort of democratic, so radical, like democratic socialism of the Tavrosi, it mutates because it's embodied in some way, and like, because like ideas don't really exist. Like ideas possess people, right? And they don't have any force unless they're in people to act. They can't exist in a vacuum. And when they're in people, the people sort of like necessarily pollute those ideas, right, with their own tendencies. And so I try. That's why like basically every institution in the Sun Eater is like run by people who don't hold its core values, right? Because it's actually kind of like that in real life, right? Like it's not even corruption or hypocrisy. It's just like a basic like human failure, in all places. And so that's really sort of the meta point, is that like actually all of these sort of abstract political philosophies, all of these ideals, like don't hold. They only hold insofar as the qualities of the individual people who are embodying those systems are of quality in themselves. So I hope that makes sense. Since the series is told retroactively, how do I decide what aspects to tease for the reader? Well, some of them are obvious, right? Like the actual sun eating, like must be teased, right? Can everybody hear me? Okay, I realized my mic was very far away. But I've had like gain issues the last couple times. But anyway, but sometimes things come along like I talk a lot about outlining, and some of this stuff is stuff that you outline for because like like this is going to be a big thing. Like if there's something big that's going to happen at the end of the book, you want to start pre-signaling that. Um, there is a thing that happens at the end of book 5 that if you look is present on the first page of book 5, but you like won't recognize it until you finish the book and go back. And in doing stuff like that, right, what you actually are doing too is rewarding rereaders, and that's a good thing to do as well, right? But as far as determining like what you should or shouldn't do, if it's a big thing, to do it. But if it's a little thing, if it's like Hadrian might make a comment about his future relationship with a character or something like that, like maybe they're enemies now, but they won't always be, or vice versa. That presents itself to me sort of organically as I'm writing. I'm like, oh, like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, let's do that. And a lot of writing actually, right, is planning enough that you can get your conscious out of the way so that you can just write, right? The reason that you outline, right, is so that you know enough about what you're doing that you can switch off your thinking brain and just let the words happen. And yeah. So yeah. A lot of that is just feeling, and that comes from practice. So let's see. Human No More, is that a new camera? Well, I've been using my phone as a camera for a while now, but I did get a new phone. And for whatever reason, it decided to like do this like way zoomed out thing, which like looks good, I think. But yeah. But I started using an app to use my phone as my webcam probably 6 months ago now, maybe a little longer, because everybody was clowning me so much. And I keep telling you all, I'm not really a YouTuber, but I guess it makes sense. So, are there series or influences that have influenced my my writing political intrigue? I don't know. I mean, probably Game of Thrones. George Martin's very good at this thing. I haven't read Game of Thrones in like 10 years, I think. The last time I read it was like right when book 5 came out. I read it twice. But yeah, so that's probably the big one. There's some there's Dune. Obviously, like Dune's got a lot of that sort of stuff. Dune is a huge influence. But I mean, there's a lot of just like history, right? Like I was saying, like really, right? Like we think that things are motivated by these sort of like mute procedural needs, right? The institutions need X or Y, but in reality, those institutions are composed of people who have, their nominal sort of goals, and then they have their real goals, and those often align, but they often don't. And like you just have to keep in mind the distance between the public person and the private person, right, in any scene, right, and sort of go back and forth on that. So. Yeah, talked about the camera. Yeah, somebody mentioned Mercy of Gods in response to my talking about my fondness for the Book of Daniel. I have heard of it. I didn't realize it had anything to do with the Book of Daniel, which is disappointing. They beat me to it. That doesn't mean I won't do it. Something like that at some point, because Daniel's so cool. My wife was reading a kid's version of that to our daughter yesterday. I noticed, and I was like, oh, that's my favorite one. But yeah, no, I've heard of it. I have the same agent. We're actually we were talking about that recently, that series recently. If you could pick a point in my series to Martin Rothfuss said to call it a day, what spot would you choose for maximum irritation? Like which book? I mean, maybe would I think and then book 5 might be the place. It might be the place. Good question. But I'll keep you in mind. I want to re-ask the old sponsors first, our sponsors first. Um, but yeah, no, for sure we should talk. At the very least for book 3. You want to finish the finale before reselling previous book. The horror, yes, the horror. Are there ways, with the rise of audiobooks, are there ways that you authors in general are having to change the writing to be more palatable in audio form? If other people have had to, I don't know about it. I have always written to be heard. The phenomenon of silent reading is a relatively modern invention. We mostly read out loud until like the last 150 years. Silent reading has really sort of taken off. There's I always say this, there's stories Julius Caesar would read silently to like kind of intimidate people because it was weird. But good prose sounds good. And the way that you know if your prose sounds good is by listening to it. And so I have always written with my ear. I like always am talking to myself and stuff. And so the rise of audiobooks has not really impacted me always because I've always been deeply conditioned by the oral tradition and by audiobooks in the first place. I owned the Lord of the Rings Robert English recordings on CD as a kid, and they were the only audiobooks I owned for like 10 years. And so I listened to them literally at the expense of music. For years growing up, I just listened to Lord of the Rings over and over and over and over. And that was a huge sort of, and that's sort of like, if there's an equivalent to my like accidentally getting splashed with the Daredevil like toxic sludge, it was that, right? So as an aspiring writer, do I have any advice for action sequences? Tips like juggling along short lines of tension, balancing faster, slow moments. You found the best I've ever read. Well, thank you. So the first thing about writing action scenes, right? And bear in mind, like there are action scenes and action scenes, right? There's like large scale combat, right? There's like sword fights. There's fighting, right? In a certain sense, there's some technical knowledge about any of those things that it would behoove you to like do some research on, right? But there are ways to write around that, right? Like I have no like combat experience, right? I know writers who do. Like I know writers in Navy SEAL, right? And so there's a lot of technical stuff and like a lot of little details, that I wouldn't get right in the way that like he would. And so often what you can do is step back from that stuff, right? And sort of provide and say less, right? I actually think that some of my action sequences maybe go on too long. And it's because I feel the need to like write about every every sword blow, because I see them so clearly in my head. Because I do have I have a fencing background and a little bit of HEMA, and I like really like all that stuff. Like I am a sword nerd. But what you can do is sort of step back, and it is okay to say less and to say something like, I actually think like Robert E. Howard basically doesn't really write action scenes. He will just say a couple of things, and that's maybe a strong way of putting it, but he's a lot more imagistic. He'll do something like say, like Conan's sketch to Crimson Maze through his foes or something like that. And it's actually perfectly sufficient to leave it at that and not really get into it. So if you feel like you have a knowledge deficit in terms of like, how do I write this stuff? Like, it is okay to step back and sort of leave it in broad strokes like that. And it can be very satisfying, right? Again, Howard is actually pretty painterly with his action scenes like this. But he has a reputation for being like a writer who is a like very sort of action adventure forward kind of writer. And, so you can actually get a reputation for being really good at action scenes while not really writing them in great detail. So like, know that there are lots of different approaches here, but in terms of balancing long short lines of tension and things like that, this is good advice, I think, for writing, period. And this is my favorite piece of advice that I give, and this is true of action scenes, but it's true of dialogue scenes as well. And that's look at your paragraphs, like physically look at them. If you've got a lot of really, really short staccato paragraphs, one-liners, two-liners, it's time to write a long one, right? And if you have a lot of long ones, it's time to switch it up. And when you look at like dialogue too, if you have every paragraph started with dialogue, please write a paragraph that doesn't, right? Because if you get too sort of clicky, in your rhythm and you're doing the same sentence structure over and over again, your reader is going to start skimming. And so what you want to do is change the tempo because that forces them to pay attention. And you can physically see, as in music, right, the tempo of the prose by looking not just at sentence length, but paragraph length. Paragraph length is super obvious. It takes you half a second to notice it. That's like a really good way to know, like, oh, I should break it up. And what those paragraph changes also can signal to you is I haven't done enough internal stuff, because like a fight is like very emotionally engaging for the character too. And this is another way you can hide from a technical deficit if you don't know how to write a sword fight, right? You don't have to. You can write about the emotional carriage of the character in that moment, right? And you'll notice maybe I should do that if you've had a lot of short paragraphs. Do a long one, get back into the character's head for a bit, and then punch his head, right? Right, and switch back and forth. So you need to make sure that you're not just doing the action scene. You have to ground the characters in the action scene or dissociate them from it, right? Like that's also an option, but you want to make sure you're playing not just in the physical dimension there. And the actual shape of the words on the page can inform whether or not you're doing that if you know what to look for. And paragraph length is a really good place to start. What saint do I ask for in your session if I'm doing market research that involves reading romanticy? Maybe ask Augustine for a little constancy there, Corey. But maybe. Are there any plans for a book tour for book 7? No plans. I would like to do some stuff for sure. I would like to do some for sure. Am I a big Batman fan? Absolutely. Absolutely. I did. Yes, I did make Hadrian have the exact same height as Batman. That is true. No, I love Batman. I just finished watching The Penguin, which was great. I kind of wish it had been tied a little bit more into the world of the film. They made a lot of noise about how this is a different part of Gotham and stuff. But I really love the police chief in the Batman with his like raspy voice, and he was in I think he was in 2 scenes. I would have liked him to be around more. I kind of thought we might see Gordon. I would have liked some of that. But it was really excellent. I really I really don't have any serious notes for the show, just beyond like I want more of that universe, basically, because I love the Batman. I'm not like I don't like the Frank Miller Catwoman. Like that's my least favorite Catwoman, so that kind of drags the film down a little bit for me. So I went in and I was like, man, this is maybe as good as Dark Knight, right? And I think it's like slightly behind at this point, but Pattinson's Batman is so good. He's the most interesting character in the film, and Batman is never the most interesting character in the film. And so so this is where I've been with Batman recently, is with the show. But yeah, no, I've read a bunch of the comics too, of course. No, I grew up with the animated series. It's actually the first show my daughter and I watched because she was too little to actually know the TV was even on. So I hadn't watched it in like 10 years, so I went through the whole thing again last year. Son of Your Book is my favorite. Well, I really like, there are things I like about all of them, right? But the one that I have the fondest memories of is Howling Dark. Howling Dark was the smoothest, easiest book to write of the bunch, and I really enjoyed it. Super self-indulgent question. I noticed the Cielson are never depicted wearing footwear. Do they not see the need for it on a daily basis? Do they have different forms for different functions? Yeah, I don't know that I've ever given any notes or described Cielson footwear at all, ever. And I think the artists have just been deciding to not put shoes on it, which is like fine, I guess. Because the Cielson are more resistant to vacuum than we are. And so it's like not really a huge deal. They need to breathe, but like their blood doesn't boil. And I don't have an explanation for that. They just are more resistant to vacuum. That's just it. So I don't know. I would imagine that they need shoes under certain circumstances, but the artists have like all unilaterally decided that they don't need shoes, which is I don't know. If it's something emergent like that, maybe I should roll with it. So how would I feel if Sun Eater got turned into a film or a TV series? I would feel delighted, and then I would be very concerned. Get the money, that's nice, and then let's see how it goes, because it is actually the case that a bad adaptation can like hurt material, right? Like I'm pretty sure that Aragon movie did not help Christopher Paolini's career, right? Now he's doing great, obviously he's doing better than me, but like I think he lost some momentum from that. I might be wrong, but I do think that a bad adaptation can actually really hurt you. So I'm actually perfectly fine with there not being one, but it would be nice. It would be nice to have one. You know, I always tell, it's funny, like my dad's friends, when they talk to him about the books, are always like, oh, when's the movie getting made, right? And he was always like, yeah, they're really excited to say, you know, but like, you know, Jimmy says like he'll wait until there's a movie, right? Like there might never be one, right? And that's fine. But like I always tell, you know, when people say this, I always say the goal of literature is not to become cinema, right? Like it'd be really cool if there was a movie. It's cool to see stuff, but like I do think actually the books are a superior art form. Like I think you can do more with a novel than you can with film. You can't do it as succinctly necessarily or necessarily as impactfully, right? All at once, right? You don't have all these different inputs, right? You don't have visual and auditory and even haptic with sound systems sometimes, but like, but I think the books are deeper. And like, you know, I can hear the film majors recoiling, but like if all they ever are books, I will be the happiest of clams. So, you know, I don't need an adaptation to fulfill me or anything. My goal is to be a working author. I am one, and you know, I actually, you know, really like this year, like my wife quit her job, right? So like I have actually achieved my life dream, like it's done, right? Like I just have to hold on to it, right? And raise my children, and I'll be very happy. So, um, to do. Have there been any times you've added things to the world building that address a world building based plot hole? Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to remember an example of my doing this. Uh, but there have been things that I've done specifically that are responses to critiques either from beta readers or even from some of you guys. You know, I've seen people say things you know, on Discord back in the day or something, and been like, "Oh, it's an interesting point. I should do something about that." Um, one of you, I won't say who actually, he's in here sometimes, has a cameo in book 7 asking a lot of questions. It'll be a surprise. But John asked, how do you think a writer finds their voice, and to what extent do you think a writer controls their voice? I think it depends on the writer. I think a lot of modern writers don't think about it at all. I mentioned this. I mentioned this. I think last stream. But I'm really surprised, or maybe it was when I was on with on Aaron's podcast. Like we never actually, as the science fiction community, talk about writing at conventions. We always talk about tropes. We talk about character. We talk about world building. We never, ever actually talk about writing. Like I think if I saw a panel that was like, you know, like a serious like technical examination of like writing better dialogue, like really, and not just like a bunch of people just sort of talking about like, you know, how clever they were with a character they made up or something, I would die. Like if we did if there was a panel about rhetorical techniques in science fiction, like I would be shocked. We never talk about writing, and so I think that most people think that writing is really about character and about world building, and it's about plot and all that stuff. Writing is about language, right? The actual medium. I'm always you know, I always sort of laugh, you know, when people say that like my prose is purple. You know, there was someone who, I think it was maybe a YouTube comment last month or something, said like, man, Christopher doesn't know if there's a difference between purple prose and bad prose, or good prose. Sorry, Christopher doesn't know the difference, that there is a difference between purple prose and good prose. And I wanted to reply, what is it actually? What's the difference, sir? Because I actually like, have a background in this. And like, can you tell me, is there like a specific rhetorical trope that you object to, right? You know, is there a style or a technique that you find offensive? Is there like, do you not like high style or something, right? Like most writers don't think about this stuff. They just like write stories. And I think that, and I think this is a shame, because I think the place where you really find your voice is in sentence construction, right? Is in paragraph construction. It's not in like what you tell your story about. It's about actual technique. And the thing about this, right? And this is a white pill. is that that's actually the thing that's most teachable, and that's the thing that's most practicable. Because there is a common toolkit, right, in grammar, right? Grammar, right, is the basic sort of structure by which you learn how to communicate, right, in the first place. And of course, like, you can break rules. I break rules all the time. I love sentence fragments, man. But you have to know the rule exists so that you know that you are breaking it, so that you know how you can break it, right? And this is true of rhetorical styles too, right? There are styles of sentence construction, right, that you can employ, right? And you have to decide the ones that make you really comfortable, or that you can deploy comfortably and things like that. And maybe there are things that you like. So, like, for example, there's a rhetorical technique called hendiades, right? It's a Greek word, and it's when you do the X and Y of something, right? Where X and Y are words that don't really belong with each other. I think I did one. Let me see if I can find it recently. I'm sure I did. Like literally in the last page I wrote. Yeah. The great face and fastness of the imperial fortress, right? Obviously you've got some alliteration there, right? You've got the F sounds, right? Face and fastness, but those words don't follow necessarily, right? Like now, especially face here, like sort of has double meaning, right? Because of the word facade. We're talking about a building, right? But the face and the fortress, right? That doesn't quite make grammatical sense, but the fact that or semantic sense. But the fact that it doesn't actually is appealing and causes the person to like step back and think about the sentence, right? And it helps that they're both F sounds in that case, right? But like that's on purpose, right? And if you know that you can do that because you know that's a sort of standard tool, right? Then you can sort of experiment. That's why I'm always talking about BYU has their rhetoric page. I think it's rhetoric.byu.edu. Has an index of like all these old rhetorical techniques, and you can like very consciously develop a style by practicing rhetorical techniques and like improving your relationship with grammar. And I think there needs to be a lot more talk about that because it's there. Like you find your voice in how you write sentences and how you tell a story, right? And not in your ideas. And all we do is talk about ideas. When I was an editor, nothing was going to make me stop listening faster than somebody who opened their pitch by talking about their magic system. Like that is so far removed from telling me that you're good at writing books as anything possibly could be. Like you might have a good idea for how magic, right, could work. It might make a good story, but like if you can't tell the story, it doesn't matter. Stories are about people; they're not about systems. So I'm rambling a bit, but this is something that I think about a lot. I think that teaching people basic grammar and rhetoric again is how, or learning it on your own if you can't, you don't have an educational opportunity, is really the way to go. Orange Ed, do people just sweat all the time or have high heat tolerance? Because the bridges are right over lava, so I figure that would be hella hot. It is, I'm sure, pretty hot, but like most of the school isn't like right on top of the canal, right? Like people don't have to stay right there. But they do. I mean, it is not cold. It is not a cold planet, so yeah. So it's hot for sure. Do do do. The Tower of Babel and Noah's Ark. Noah's Ark. Both sort of apocalypses. So I keep them here. Since I've reached the end, what was the hardest aspect to write about? Anything involving extra dimensions. let's just leave it at that. Let's see. I'm excited to reread these more than any other series. Well, thank you. You told the story, made it more enjoyable. Many books I can't imagine reading again. With you there. And that's partly like why I really wanted to make this a focus. I think that like any book that's worth reading should be worth reading like 10 times. So yeah. Just started reading Empire Silence, loving it. Awesome. When it comes to short stories, do I need to read them in order, or can I read them after just quiet? You can really read them whenever you like. There are some people who say that you like must read them necessarily like in their time order and stuff. I think that's a little too hardcore. I think you can like bear in mind that there are giant time jumps between the books and that it might take time for you to understand what happened in those time jumps, and that's like on purpose. Frequently, like a question that I want readers to ask at the beginning of each book is like, how did we get to this place, right? Like it should feel like a book is missing. Because actually, like in universe, a book is missing, right? Like the collection is incomplete, actually, and that's part of the game. So, can I confirm that Hadrian found sun eating to be the most delicious thing he has ever eaten? Yes, it was incredibly good, very spicy. Face melting. Even. Are there fictional mech walkers you mentally picture Solon Colossi to look like? I can't mentally picture anything actually. So no. Everything in my head is like just black on black smudges. Basically, I can do spatial layout, but I can't see anything. Um, it's very hard to explain. I have some form of aphantasia, but it's not exactly right. So. Let's see. I'm new to reading sci-fi and fantasy as an adult. Read Lord of the Rings Inheritance when I was younger. Would I recommend reading Gene Wolfe or Frank Herbert before reading Sun Eater? I want to do it right. There's no way to do it wrong. If you're I would only caution you that if you are sort of new to reading again, like maybe Book of the New Sun is going to be a little hard. Book of the New Sun is pretty challenging, and it's like supposed to be like it's supposed to be a puzzle that you're solving. I don't think it's anywhere near as hard as people paint it out to be. But if you're like worried about reading comprehension or even enjoyment, that might not be the place to go. Like that's really like the literary equivalent of like like heavy lifting, right? Like you want to stretch a little bit first. You maybe should read Dune first, like before you read my stuff for sure. Maybe I don't. It's not required reading. There are plenty of people. I find that the people who read my stuff first and then go back and read Dune tend more to say they like my books better, which is interesting. But but I don't know. I think that you, in a sense, it doesn't make sense to read like backwards in time because like my work is sort of like addressing ideas that those earlier books gave me, and Dune is one of those books that like really inspired. Besides, you should read Dune because it's awesome, right? Like Dune is really great. So I don't know, maybe do that first. But you don't have to, any order is going to work. um I reference characters making a gesture with the first and last fingers to ward off evil. Yes, this is a real thing. You see it around the Mediterranean. Italians still do it. And you do this to put the evil eye on someone or to ward the evil eye off. Depending on context. This is where the heavy metal horns come from. It is not actually right. It is not devil horns. Actually, it is an Italian charm against evil. And Dio thought it looked cool. But it actually, yeah. So funnily enough, all those all those black metal guys are actually doing a warding sign against evil traditionally, and are not um, are not doing what they think they're doing, which is very funny. But I worked it in there because hell yeah. One of our priests says Daniel is not a history book, but a fantasy allegory. I'm sure that's true. I like parts of those events did happen historically, right? But I suspect in the same way that like Jonah um, is fictional, right? It is not like diegetic history. I think that's probably true of Daniel, or at least of parts of Daniel. But at the same time, the actual prophecies are like very important, right? So like that's difficult. It's like Esther is like clearly a novel. Like Esther is like that did not happen actually, right? And it doesn't need to have happened to be scripture, right? Like that's not a problem. but I suspect that's like probably true. Um, but I'm not an expert on that sort of thing for by any means, so I don't want to speak out of school. People do not spin on their heels in a fight. Yes, that yeah, you want to be on the other part of your foot almost all the time. Actually, if you're on your heel, you're in trouble. That's for sure. Um, yeah, yeah. There's almost no cause for really long giant paragraphs. There's always a logical reason to break, like at the half page mark or something. Um, you know, uh, if half mortal merch could exist in the Imperium, without risk of chapter execution, what would Hadrian find most galling? I really want to answer this question, but I don't know how. Uh, I don't know what the answer would be, but I feel like I should answer it. I just don't know. I have to think about it. Um, how do I differentiate character voices writing by ear help? Yeah, totally. Because you could do something like super simple, right? And like assign a. You don't have to write the accent into the character precisely, right? And you certainly don't have to go as hard as like J.K. Rowling does with like Hagrid's speech mannerisms. But if you like assign an accent to how a character speaks, and it can just be your sort of stereotyped conception of an accent, and you imagine that in your head, for example, and then you write the character right, but like write the words normal, but like right hearing that accent, that usually is like enough of a character change in your head for you to really get a voice to be different. Um, Another thing you can do is you can give characters individual ticks. I usually recommend people read Gene Wolfe's Book of the Long Sun, which is a sequel series to New Sun, because all the characters in that series have very, very specific speech patterns on purpose. It's like a very conscious part of the book's construction. And so you can get a sense of like different ways you can make characters talk by reading that book. I think it's a really, really good study in sort of diverse dialogue. And it's a delightful series. It's in a way easier to read than Book of the New Sun is. I think it's a lot easier to get into, but it is a lot harder to like fully understand. I think because it's just because of the nature of the story. But I think it's really, really good. Uh, doo doo doo. Ouch! An old metal singer. His name is Ronnie James Dio, Brandon. And he's the best. He is. I mean, he's no longer with us. He died in 2009. But he's the greatest. Is who he is. Let's see. Recently read Pain, God, and Other Delusions by Harlan Ellison. There's a story titled Bright Eyes, which reminded me of the Anar. Have I ever read that? I have not. Um, I read a couple. I read a couple Ellison shorts. I've read Repent Harlequins of the TikTok Man. That's the one I remember most clearly. But I have not actually. So I was trying to figure out why people kept asking me if I'd ever read I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and I finally figured it out. I won't say it because it's a spoiler. But I was very disturbed uh, that had happened. But uh, I have not read a lot of Ellison. I have a friend who uh like loves Ellison. I love Ellison as like a character, right? Like he's just such a grump. But I've not read a lot of his stuff. Um but it is when I read like I read Dangerous Visions, right? The anthology he edited, but mostly I haven't actually read his own stuff. His Star Trek episodes, obviously. But what does the sign of the sun disk look like? It's you go like this, right? And then you, if you're on the planet, right, you like find the sun and make a loop around it, right? But if you don't, have a sun available, you just raise it, right? And then it is to your forehead, to your heart, to your lips, and then back. Have I found a bookstore in Salt Lake to hold a signing? I have not had time to even look, man. I will. I'll try King's English then. I see the suggestion there. There's a chance it might not happen. So yeah. Sorry, my wife had messaged me on the other screen. But there's been a lot of stuff that has to like go into getting this convention worked out, and it might just not be feasible this time. But I'll be back. I go to Utah pretty regularly, so it'll happen. But we'll see what happens. Let's see. Vishrud, how much had I planned of the entire series? Do I have Hadrian's whole timeline mapped out? I do. No, I did not have it all mapped out. I had like a wish list of things I wanted to do, and I knew where the ending was going to go, and I had like points along the way I wanted to hit, but I didn't know the order and stuff. So I like figured out book one, and then I like looked at what was ahead of me, and then I figured out book two, and some of that got into book two, and then I kept on. I usually go one book at a time. One thing I love about Sun Eater is Hadrian's style of writing, also and character feels very distinct. How do I manage to do that successfully? Partly that's just practice. Like I've written so much as Hadrian now that it's pretty second nature. I'm um, mostly worried about Hadrian's voice being my voice. Like I might just not be able to escape. And like after Hadrian, I'll sound like Hadrian forever. I think that might be true. But but so a certain amount of it has just been like this is my first thing, so like my voice could just develop as this character, and so maybe that's also a bonus, right, is that I like have developed in this way and stuff like that. But um, I like have a pretty clear. So I can't picture things in my head very well, but like I can hear this voice very clearly when I like am in the mode, right? I'm trying to write and stuff like that. And it's not my voice, right? It sounds like a different voice, but I can hear it pretty sharply. And in the same way, talking about accents, right? Like I just sort of like lean into that, and at this point it's like very easy for me to say like, oh, this is how Hadrian speaks. But there are also like deliberate rhetorical flourishes, right? Like Hadrian does use a lot of this sort of like formal rhetoric and stuff because of his education and so on, and so it's just sort of leaning into those techniques and things. No, Hadrian is 6'3". He's short for a Palatine. um Short for a Palatine. Without being uplifted, what is the maximum level of sophistication the Cielson could have achieved? I don't know. I mean, this is a really interesting philosophical question, right? Because a question that I ask myself frequently is why do we not have a grand unifying theory for physics, right? And one answer is that we can't have one because maybe we aren't sophisticated enough as organisms to obtain one, right? Another answer is that it might be impossible, or like actually, like objectively, completely impossible. And these are interesting questions, right? Um, but uh, so it's possible that the Cielson are fundamentally biologically incapable of getting past point X, not because of like a straight sort of crystal IQ limitation, but because of some other feature of their biology, neurology, whatever, right? Suppose that, for example, seeing the color red somehow was necessary for developing space flight, right? They can't see it. So like can maybe there'd be a limitation. That's an analogy, right? Maybe there's some other defect, right? Like you have a species, for example, that like I don't know, uh can't mentally picture things, right? Let's pick on me, right? And like really really badly, like can't do spatial reasoning, right? um you know and there's like a hard limitation imposed by that fact, right? So maybe the Cielson are limited, right? Would have been limited from achieving space flight without help at all, maybe, right? On the other hand, maybe not actually. Like maybe the fact that they were had help, let's say, uh, actually hobbled them more, right? Because they didn't have to get these things on their own. That often is the case as well. So like these are all questions, and they are questions that like um, might not be fully answered within Hadrian's story. So have I had any offers for an adaptation? I have not. I have not. I think a video game would be very cool. I'm with you there. I do love my video games. I'm wondering why do I wear that shirt? I wore a uniform, like all through grade school, well, until high school. I wore a uniform in college because I worked 6 nights a week, and I just wore my work uniform to class all the time. And so partly it's habit. Partly it's also because if I do wear something else at this point, my wife thinks it's weird. And so I have I'm sort of trapped. It's like my uncle has a goatee, right? And he accidentally nicked it and had to shave it once. And my aunt screamed when she saw him because he had never ever shaved his face like in their entire relationship. So it's sort of something like that. But I also find like it's just one less thing to worry about. Like I never think about like what I have to wear, right? I just wear the same thing every day, and that this is sort of I know that people like Steve Jobs and Zuckerberg do this sort of thing, and I thought I would try it. Like I was already mostly doing it, but I was like, why don't I commit to the bit and like not worry about it? I used to be more disciplined about that and about other things. I would also like eat the same breakfast every single day and not think about it, right? Just so that I could think about other things. Um, and yeah, it's just sort of easy at this point. It's funny how long it took people to like start asking that question too. But this isn't just for the show. Like I wear the same thing basically every day. Unless I'm going to the gym or something. But yeah. It's not just the shirt either, it's the same outfit. Every day. Um I'll add a coat if it's really cold. Um what is the biggest moral lesson learned from getting to know Hadrian? I don't know. That's a really interesting question. It's a really interesting question. Um yeah. I'd have to think about it. Hey Christopher, hope writing is going well. Just curious, what writing a comic is like. I got a story I would like to convert to a script. Yeah, so writing a comic is in a way a lot easier, frankly, than writing a novel because almost all of what you write is never going to be seen by anybody except the artist and maybe the editor. What you have to do basically is there are some sort of like technical things you need to know for like how to communicate that you want a speech bubble to wrap between panels and things like that, or like how you want the panels to be displayed. Um, but basically, what you do is you'll say you have a header that says like page one, panel one, and if you have a specific idea for what you want that panel to be like full page, right? Then you'll say that, right? So it'll be like page one, panel one, full page, half page, right? You can also like not specify, right? You can just like say like I have 5 panels on this page, artist, it's up to you, right? And the thing you need to bear in mind in writing a comic book, if you're not drawing it, right, is that it's not your show, right? Comics are not about the writing, right? The writing is there to inspire the artist to make the comic book. It's the artist's show, right? And you need to get out of the way. This is one of those like I very controversially think Batman Year One sucks because Frank Miller does not shut up. That book has got too many text boxes. It is, and it gets in the way of the art, which I don't like the art in that particularly much either. I've been like real down on Frank Miller today, between this and saying his Catwoman is lame, but his Catwoman is lame. Uh, but like there's just too much talking. Like the point of the comic book is the illustrations. That's why people like comics. They like the artwork. And so you need to talk to your artists about how you want to do this, but you also need to trust them to make decisions because they're an artist too, and you need to respect their artistic principles. So sometimes, like when I did mine, man, I worked with Steve McNiven, so I just shut up and let Steve work, right? Like he's a genius. But what you'll do then is you'll describe what you want in the panel, and then you'll do the dialogue for that panel like a movie script. Character A says this, character A name, colon, dialogue, character B, colon, dialogue. You got to make sure that you don't put more in the panel than it can hold, right? And another super obvious thing that I just never thought about is like you can only do one thing in a panel, right? Like Thor cannot pick up his hammer and swing it. He can only do one thing because it's a picture, right? And so you have to be careful when you're writing your descriptions to make sure that you're not using a panel for more than one thing. And if you have to do more than one thing, then that should suggest how the page should be structured, right? Maybe you need a cutaway where the main panel is Thor swinging his hammer, but you have like a little window box where he's picking it up or something, right? And so you have to think about how the action could inform the composition, and you have to give the artist some notes, but then you have to get the heck out of there and let the artist do his thing, because the artist like might also change things and might say, hey, I think it would be better if you did this, and you should like listen. And I kind of think you should give the artist the veto. Personally, I think you should get out of your own way when you're the writer. And it's really, really their show. It really should be. Now I have a super chat here from Paul. Shout out to Yossi. Yossi, Paul, thank you. Thank you for $9.99. Will I ever do another memoir series? I mean, maybe, yeah, possibly, but it won't be next. It's too late to get tickets to Dragonsteel, Ruocchio v. Sanderson jousting match. Man, if there was jousting, it would be great. I do think, though, to answer the question seriously, I think the Dragonsteel is sold out, and I think it was sold out before I got there. So, let's see. Turn it all the way up. Bleed the angst onto the page. Yes. Oh, well, thank you, Elise. That's very kind of you to say. I really appreciate that. Ross, I'm here. I'm here to teach new words. That is my thing. That's my thing. It's really funny. Liam Hall, who has a YouTube channel, Liam's Lyceum. He wrote a novella, and my first note to him when I read it for a blurb, I wrote back and I was like, Liam, usually I'm the one teaching people words, so I owe you, man. Liam is a philology guy, so he was really flexing the obscure words. It was awesome. It was awesome. It was super fun too. It was like it was almost like it was a sword and sorcery thing, but it was like by way of almost like it had a Clark Ashton Smith thing going on. It was like very it's really hard for me to describe. It was really cool. I can't remember the title, Liam. Gosh, I'm sorry. Off the top of my head. Dreamer Awake, I think. It was like really, really old school. Like if Liam told me that he'd found this manuscript in like the 1920s, I would have believed him. Reid, I can't answer that question, I'm afraid. There's no way to answer it that doesn't say too many things, I think. Why on the Fall? Thoughts on Discworld? I have never read Discworld. It's never really appealed to me. Like that sort of like parodic kind of humor is just, it's not my bag. It always sounded, I don't want to say that it sounded dumb, but it sounded dumb. Like it didn't appeal to me. So I've never read it. Man, I can't believe how far behind I am on the chat. We're talking about extra dimensions. I feel like that was an hour ago. John, I'm a classics major, so part of what I do is study Greek and Latin, and I analyze rhetoric. Yeah, no, man, like learning like actual like Greek or Latin rhetoric is like, man, that is really the way to get a grounding in this, because like basically what the English rhetoricians did is import the Greek style basically completely, and then just like apply it to English grammar, which of course, like this is also, there's sort of a period in like the 18th century where they tried to Latinize English grammar. For example, like the rule against split infinitives is to emulate Latin, and like for no other reason. Like you could absolutely split an infinitive in English. To boldly go is actually better than to go boldly. It is not ungrammatical to say to boldly go. I give Star Trek that one. So yeah. A stuffed Hadrian head. Yes, that might be in bad taste. That might be in bad taste. Hadrian would certainly also not think very well of like groupies if he encountered them. I think that would be, and any sort of merchandise that played to that demographic would make him very uncomfortable. Let's see. Is there an easy way to determine where each of the stories specifically goes in the timeline? There probably isn't. I have like a vague notion of where some of them go, but there are some stories like Parliament of Owls that are just set some time before the Cielson invade the galaxy. Vaguely, I don't know exactly when, and I haven't like hardcore locked them all down. Um, so the first thing is like, don't worry about feeling derivative. Like if you try, you could try really, really hard not to derive from something, and somebody's going to accuse you of it anyway. And those people, your response to those people should be, go make your own thing and shut up, right? Like you don't tell them that, but like it doesn't like that criticism is useless, right? I was talking to who was I talking to last couple of days, and where I was saying like who was I talking? It was an interview I did. I can't even remember. Oh my gosh. Um, is that early on, like when science fiction was new, right? Like 100 years ago, when it sort of really started. I don't buy the Mary Shelley hypothesis. It started like the 1920s. Um, and Vernon Wells are sort of precursors to the art form as a movement, right? And like as a literary movement, science fiction starts in the 1910s. Really, there's some earlier things that gesture towards it, but whatever, right? But when you're early in the genre, right, there are no rules, and so what you do is you start to you pave the wilderness and you come up with these ideas, and you're like, like you're original, but you're original in the sense that what you're doing is you're borrowing from outside of the genre and bringing it in, right? um like Lovecraft does not create cosmic horror on his own. Clark Ashton Smith is involved. There are other writers, and it's really post Lovecraft, all of his acolytes that sort of formalize the language of the genre into something that's more Lovecraftian, right? But what you also see in those early days is these writers who they're pulling from each other, right? Like very consciously, right? Speaking of like Lovecraft mentions Smith by name multiply in his stories, right? Mentions Howard and pulls from Howard's ideas and vice versa. And there were a lot more cavalier about doing this, because what people were doing early on, right, with the creation of something like the mythos, right, is they weren't creating a fantasy universe right together. What they were doing was injecting fantasy elements into history. And so it made sense that Smith's stuff needed to work with Lovecraft's, needed to work with Howard's, because they were all working it into history, right? They had a different attitude towards how this worked. And so borrowing from each other wasn't a problem. But at the same time, what people were doing when they wrote their own speculative fiction, whether that was science fiction or fantasy or alternate history or whatever, is they were bringing stuff in from outside. They're bringing it from myth, they're bringing it from history, they're bringing it from science, from religion, from New Age occult mysticism, from whatever, right? And because they were bringing in a new thing from outside, they were original. What they were doing was deriving from stuff that was pre-science fiction, right, or pre-fantasy. And what's happening now, right, is people are borrowing from earlier works of fantasy and science fiction rather than going outside, right? Or they're doing both, right? And usually it's both, right? One of my objections to a lot of modern fantasy is that really what you're reading is like someone who read fantasy, who read fantasy, who read fantasy, who read fantasy, and it's not enough in contact with folklore and tradition and religion and all these things, history, which is why I prefer like Guy Gavriel Kay to someone like Brandon Sanderson, right? Um, and I prefer we go back to the sources and try again. But at the same time, the benefit we have to writing now, right, is we have this grammar, we have this history of this field, and what you can do, and what I worried about doing, was I wanted to look at Dune, and I wanted to look at the books Dune was responding to, because Dune is not original, right? Dune is a response to John Carter and stories like John Carter, right? It is a deconstruction of those stories. It is a second wave science fiction story. It is a new wave story. It is predicated on its response to earlier work in the same way that mine is, right? And like maybe Frank did it more artfully than me, maybe at least in the early stages. I think it's fair, but like he's also responding to earlier stuff, and what you get is this grammar and this opportunity to springboard off of earlier work. So please set aside your anxiety about being derivative right now, because like actually there's an opportunity in derivation to tell stories they couldn't tell in 1920 because there wasn't a Herbert yet, to respond to, right? There wasn't, there's just barely a John Carter to respond to, right? So the fact that you're coming to the genre later is fine, right? It gives you a different set of opportunities. Challenges, yes, but opportunities. As far as actual world building advice, because I have to come down off my soapbox. Um, uh, the biggest piece of advice is actually like, don't overdo it. Because world building is a giant hole that's between you and writing your book that you are going to fall into if you let yourself. Do what you need to do to get the story to work and to serve the story, because most of the details that you're probably worrying about, you either won't need or they will present themselves as you're writing. You'll be writing a paragraph and you're like, oh, where does the wine come from? I don't know. And then you need to answer that question. And once you answer that question, right, then you can reuse it and it can come up later, right? But you don't need to know the answer to every question in advance, because you don't even know all the questions yet, right? And that's okay. So I would give yourself a little bit of grace and not worry about it. Worry about your story, because like I was saying earlier, where the opportunity really comes in for you to be you is in how you tell the story, not what you tell the story about. Because like all of these stories actually are derivative of European history, right? Like fantasy stories, right? If you got knights and castles, guess what? France called, they want their knights and castles back, right? It's fine. Obviously don't like reprint like whole paragraphs from other writers or something, but like, yeah. So, do I enjoy writing in first or third person better? I enjoy writing in first better at this point because I'm most comfortable with Hadrian's voice. Let's see. Any tips for authors trying to write a story from the first person perspective to make sure readers enjoy the main character's perspective? It depends on like what you mean by enjoy, right? Like, I think the thing that you should do is try to make the characters authentically themselves as possible. And one thing that you might do, since you're writing in first person, is pick something about the character that's super unlike you and commit to that and sort of build the character out from that thing. Because that might help you to differentiate that character from your voice pretty quickly. And if you can go from there and make the character as particularly themselves as possible, I think you're off to a good start. So, Domino the Great working on his first book. What advice do I have? Let's see. We talked a little bit about like the world building and like anxiety of influence and stuff like that. Basically tell Harold Bloom to shut up about the influence thing, because like everybody's influenced by something, right? I think Harold Bloom in that book says that Shakespeare is like an original, like he's not influenced, right? Which is crazy. Hamlet is a remake. Like, what is he talking about? It's so bizarre. But I don't know. The sort of most basic bit of advice always, right? Like writers always say you should read, right? And that like writers read, and what you need to do is read and read and read, and that is good advice for like last week, right? What you need to do now is actually stop reading. Writers who tell you that what you need to really do is read are trying to sell you their books, and I certainly am. But if you want to write your own, you have to write it. And this is like stupid, obvious advice. But like the number of people I've said this to who are like, oh, wow, actually, hold on, right, is a little bit high. And it's kind of startling. You need to make time to write, and you need to like, even though it's not your job and you're not making any money off of it right now, probably treat it like it's work, right? Find time for it every day, right? Pretend that you have like a second gig for real. It's a second gig that pays absolutely no money right now, right? But that you have to work like an hour at it every day, right? Or whatever amount of time you can dedicate. Make yourself a schedule, stick to that schedule, treat it like your job, right? And do that. And eventually enough of that will stack up and you'll have a book by the time you're done. But like all this other stuff that you could be doing, like world building details for your world that are not relevant to your story, right? Or, rereading stuff that you've already written, like don't do that. Don't do that, right? Don't fall into these holes. Actually write the words. All that matters is today is the new words that you're going to add to your project, because you can't really like improve it until it's done. You can't really understand what you've written until it's finished, because then you can see the whole thing at once, right? And so your most important task as a writer on any given day is to finish your work in progress. And if you can't finish it today, that's fine. I've been working on mine for a week, a year and a week, right? I'm still not there, right? But you need to finish it, because once you finish it, you can worry about all that other stuff. It's way better to have a rough finished draft than it is to have a lot of polished pre-writing work. Like, all the world building notes in the world are useless if there's no story for people to read, right? Tolkien could never have published the Silmarillion out the gate. That could never have been the first book. And if it was, nobody would have read it. It takes a Lord of the Rings to deserve a Silmarillion, actually, right? Tolkien's like a really bad model to emulate if you're trying to be a professional writer, right? He only really wrote 2 books in his lifetime. And they just happen to be the best ones. So, yeah. Let's see. Have I ever thought of a change you would have wanted to implement in a previous book? Not like super specifically. There is just sort of like there's sort of a better way to do it. There's part of me that wishes I'd started book 1 with Hadrian waking up on Emesh, and then handling all the earlier stuff by flashback. I think would have been fun. But yeah, so it's hard to pick something particularly, but like a general sense of like maybe I could do things better for sure. Let's see. I'm gonna grab some water real quick. If you guys will give me a second, I've been give me 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. But yeah, no, yeah, it's hard to say precisely. Yeah, does it make me nervous to finish Sunny Deer? I've been so successful to starting a new series worry me. No, I think what worries me is whether or not people will like the last book. Because if people do not like the last book, then the other 6 books are not quite worthless, but they're worth a lot less. And so I'm worried about that. If book 7 is out and people are in aggregate very happy with it, I will be relieved, actually. I'm not nervous about the next thing at all. I think the next thing is awesome. I think the next things, I still have options. I think I'm very excited about a lot of the next stuff, whether that's Adaman or something else. I don't know. But whatever the next thing is, I think is going to be really cool. I'm very confident in a lot of these ideas. I'm very excited to work on some of them. I am mostly nervous about sticking the landing. I'm very happy with it at the moment. It's kicking my butt, but I think that people will like it. The beta readers seem to really like it so far. It's still a rough draft, but that's the big concern. The big concern is sticking the landing. What are my favorite video games of all time? It's probably obvious that I'm a big From Software fan. I feel the need to say that I was on that train substantially earlier. I got on with Dark Souls 1 like in 2011. So I'm a little bit of a hipster. But I like all those. Mostly, I think Bloodborne is the best one. I like Elden Ring a lot. But Dark Souls 1 is my favorite of the bunch. For like nostalgic reasons. But Bloodborne is super great. But like of all time, really, like I grew up a big Nintendo kid. I still love Legend of Zelda. I love Super Mario. I love platformers. I love Metroidvanias. Hollow Knight's great. Old Metroid games are great. I was never a big Castlevania guy. But I love that. I love that stuff. I love RPGs. I grew up with like Golden Sun on the Game Boy Advance. Those games are so good. I've talked before. I love the Tales series a lot. I was never a Final Fantasy guy because I didn't have a PlayStation until the 4. So I was never into Final Fantasy, but I like the Tales games a lot. Tales Symphonia was on the GameCube. That's great. But I played most of them since then. Um, and then games like more obscure RPGs like Bad Kaitos. I've talked before. I love Lost Odyssey on the Xbox 360. It's a great game. And yeah, those are a few. A big one for the year is the Elden Ring DLC. That was my big sort of new release today. I really like. I like the new 2D Zelda game. I've been playing that right now. But yeah, no, but I love the DLC. I kind of hope it wins Game of the Year because I think it would be funny for the DLC to win the Game of the Year. I think that would be awesome. I think the Witcher 3 DLC won, so there's precedent, but I think that would be funny. What advice do I have for reading Dante and getting the most out of his work? My understanding is that you should read the Italian, but I can't. But I don't know about getting the most out of it, but it's not the most accurate translation, but I really enjoy Longfellow's translation just because Longfellow is such a great English poet in his own right, right? I think it's delightful. It's not the most sort of textually accurate, but yeah, so you know, I don't know, just find a good English verse translation and enjoy it. I think might be perhaps the best. But then if you really want to get into it, so you might want to get like a more literal translation and have some footnotes and like do the work or something. But yeah. Am I seeing Gladiator 2 this weekend? I'm probably not seeing it this weekend. So I've never seen Gladiator 1, actually. I've mentioned this before. It surprises people. But when it came out, I was too little for my parents to let me see it, and I like never just went back and saw it. So one day maybe. But I love your Thor comic. Oh, thanks. I almost like never hear anybody who's read it, so I appreciate that. Is that something I thought of doing for a while, or to come up with a story and the opportunity to present itself? The opportunity presented itself, and I came up with a story backwards. Uh, you know, yeah. No, so Steve McNiven. I met Steve McNiven at GalaxyCon here in Raleigh in 2019, I want to say. And he had just finished the book reading in his hotel room, and he's like, I saw you live in Raleigh. Are you here? And I was like one aisle over. So I went over and introduced myself, and we hung out. And he's like a big old school sci-fi fan. So we talked about that for a while, and just sort of yeah. You know, sort of went from there. He he talked to the folks at Marvel, and they were going to do an anthology series that was like veteran artists, new writers, and vice versa. And my story was the only one that got finished and delivered, so they had to like figure out something to do with it. They like abandoned that project, and they just ended up reprinting it eventually, which is like what took so long. So you know, let's see. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Oop, a chat jumped. Hang on. Thoughts on Court of Owls as villainous antagonist in Reeves Pattinson Batman movie? I think that's something they could probably do. For sure. It feels like they could be moving in that direction. I think it'd be cool. It'd be different. I feel like that would make the Riddler even more justified, frankly. um, you know, very strange commentary on how that movie feels about his actions. Very, very interesting. Seems to be saying two things at once. Does the process of submitting and publishing short stories work? How does it work? It depends on like what the forum is. If it's a magazine online or something, then like they have submission guidelines, and you like submit to the box and stuff. Sometimes they'll invite you to write something. And sometimes if it's like a anthology people are putting together, they'll invite you, or they'll have open submissions or something like that. It just depends on the forum. Almost all of my stories I either wrote for my own collections or because someone invited me to something. I've never pitched one to somebody. Any luck getting an event for Salt Lake City? I haven't yet. No. It may not happen at this point because it's running out of time. But yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to take that out of context. Just wondering what theme. Boreal, I missed something. Hang on. Vis-a-vis transhumanism and things like that. Well, so the only thing I really can say about that is like Solent culture is not contemporary American culture, and it is, I think, maybe useful in building another setting to have cultures in places diverge from our culture in certain pointed ways, and you know, like that's basically it. I certainly not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. Let's see. Harry Potter's derivative of Tom Brown's School Days. Ad Fontes. Yeah. No, yeah. Um I know you're super busy, but a storyteller you should watch Arcane. I've heard it's great. Heard it's great, but yeah. Christopher, we need some plushies. I like basically don't have time to watch almost anything. Like it took a lot out of me to watch the Penguin. Like it's just like, like even one night a week is a lot. Especially for the next few months. I don't think I'm gonna be able to watch that much. I don't know if you can tell how tired I am, but I am very, very tired. I sleep like 4 hours a night these days to try and get things done. Will there be any part of book 7 that's harder to write than chapter 40 of book 6? Man, I hope not. So far, no. I can't afford a 3-month chapter at this point. That will make the book late by a whole year at this point. So it is not going to happen. I hope it's not going to happen. Hi, Christopher. Do you know when those who purchase Diamond Editions secondhand will have Howling rights transferred? Seller has already emailed Steve. If it already emailed Steve, it's handled. If Steve or my wife have received an email about rights transfers, we've handled it. So, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm trying not to think about any of that stuff at all. Steve and Jenna have been handling it because I am so overworked trying to get this book finished. Like really, I've thought about canceling even doing these just because everything is just taking something out of me at this point. This book is really, really frying my brain. Yeah, Pedro, any news on reprints for the hardcover of Ashes of Man? It'll be next year. Dodge just it costs money to print thousands of books at once, so they did books 2 and 3, and they just need a pause, and then they'll do 4 and 5, and then 6 will happen before the 7 reprint, and it'll all be done. I don't want to miss this though. Dark Souls 2 is overhated. Dark Souls 2 is great. Actually, some of the weaker level design, but Dark Souls 2 is great. So Lost Odyssey is one of my favorite games. Hell yeah, so good. So good. Charlie says, "What? That's crazy." I'm not sure what. Movie night. Oh, must be Gladiator. Yeah, no. Yeah, no, I never saw it. Never saw it. But aside from Writer Dojo, what good educational writing resources do I recommend? So I don't like go in for writing resources like in general. Like I just sort of always do my own thing. The one solitary exception is that I was a big fan of Michael Stackpole's The Secrets podcast when I was a kid. That helped me sort of get stuff going. He has an episode on first chapters that was super, super helpful to me. One of the first things I ever finished was basically a clone of his first chapter. I just said, I'm going to write something that's the same plot just to sort of practice as the one he walks through in that podcast. I've always kind of wanted to go back and redo that scene in something. And do my own little version of it, but they're still posted. He recorded them in the aughts, but it was really cool. I got to meet him year before last and say, hey, that actually really got me here. That was the first step in a lot of ways, which is cool. He's a really, really nice guy. Arcane is amazing. Yeah, I heard it's great. Love the Thor comic. Thank you. Love for the Thor comic. Always appreciated. What's the need to hit the deadline other than publishers' expectations? I think your audience is large enough. You need more time. Your fans would understand. There's a personal reason why I really need to get the book done by a certain time. It would be a lot easier on me personally if the book was done soon. But there are also like simply speaking, there are also just issues of general momentum. Like I don't want it to take longer to be done. I want the book to come out, and it's worth working hard for. So it's not like I'm not burning out creatively. I'm burning out like biochemically, which is a different sort of issue. Um yeah. In terms of build variety, DS2 is only second to Elden Ring. That is true. Um, there's definitely some Bloodborne nods in the books for sure. The hero of Raleigh. No, that's you, man. Uh, let's see. I don't know why I thought you were also local. You may be, but I feel like we talked before. Anyway, it's all sort of blurring together. Let's see. Yeah, Nicholas is wrong about Earth of the New Sun. Earth of the New Sun is great, and I think I disagreed with him on the podcast about that. I can understand why people think it explains too much, but frankly, I think that Book of the New Sun might explain too little. Right? I saw someone earlier saying the ending felt rushed, and um one yeah. Oh, Jared's here. Yeah, Jared will also fight anyone slandering Earth and New Sun. There we go. Hey, man. Yeah, Earth is great. The ending, it's not the ending of Book of the New Sun is rushed. It's that it ends before the story actually ends. And you're sort of left to understand the ending of the story by implication. And that is a super advanced power move. But you know, I think the extra book is merited. Man, I am super tired. My brain is just not going at this point. Also, I reached the end of the chat, which is amazing. I was so far behind. Look, Malignant Cactus. If I have to be dethroned by somebody, Tad Williams, is perfectly fair. I'll take it. I've heard that last book is wonderful. Everybody seems to really be just over the moon about it, which is great. Absolutely love that for Tad Williams. I met him once. He was at a DAW publisher dinner. I think this was 2018. This was like right after the first book came out, and he went around and he introduced himself to like all the new kids, which was really cool. I have not seen another writer as high profile as him be that cool about like little guys. Like that was really cool. Oh, that's not true. Jim Butcher is really cool. And then Larry Correa is pretty cool. Larry's not quite on like Jim or Ted's level. I think it's hard to really gauge relative size. I might be wrong about that, but Jim Butcher is really cool. He gave me a pen. He had a lot of opinions about what you should sign with. Donald, thank you for the $10. Yeah, no, but Tad going around and shaking all the new kids' hands really impressed me. It's like I want to be that guy when I grow up. I have never actually I've never actually read those either. So I need to one of these days. I knew when I said I was tired, at least, that you were going to tell everybody that I should go to sleep a little bit early. I can plug along a little bit more, but some of these big questions I'm really struggling. I hope I'm really struggling with right now. So I hope I'll have some clemency for being a little bit less articulate than usual. Some of the earlier rants burned out whatever brain cells I had left. Are the Cielson alien neo-Gnostics? They definitely have some Gnostic thinking in their pedigree. in their history. Yeah, no, this is sort of like I'm saying, right? Like basically, my part of my thesis here is that basically all of these theories, like for society construction or for world, basically break down once they're embodied. Like the question is what doesn't, right? And hopefully we'll have something of an answer to that by the end of the series. But there are problems. Like you can't actually be a Gnostic because like it's wrong, and like it will cause you to be wrong. And like you can't be you can't be whatever the empire is, right? A feudalist, a pure monarchist, because like they just won't survive first contact with the enemy. Like nothing does. Like everything breaks down, right? So yeah. So Ted and Jim are cool IRL. Yeah, I was super impressed with the one thing about Jim Butcher though is when I was working the booth with him and he left, we had so many authors in the booth. This was at a Dragon Con that they put my books back out on the table by pushing Jim's apart to either side because Jim had way more books than me. And so I ended up standing in the middle of all these Dresden books with my like narrow stack of not Jim's books, and people would come up thinking I worked for him, which is not his fault. But it was so frustrating to me because I was trying to sell my books, and they put me in the middle of all of Jim's stuff, and people were like, "Oh, which book should I start with?" And I'm like, I don't remember which book is first. I learned it was Stormfront, which I should have remembered because I'd read it like 10 years before. But everybody thought I was one of Jim's employees because of the way the booth was set up, which was not optimal. But he was super cool. He was super cool. Will we ever learn what the trial of the heart was? Maybe. I think it would be fun. I'm trying to decide if I think it would be better to show it or not. But you get a couple more hints about it in book 7, I think. Unless we cut them. We'll see what happens. Any specific inspiration for Cat? Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning this. This has increasingly been a thing. Like, I am clearly not, clearly not in favor. Hadrian even is clearly not in favor of the empire, right? He's not a jingoist. Hadrian is very pragmatic in his approach to politics and to the Solid Empire. What Hadrian cares about is people. What Hadrian has always cared about is people individually. Orion says Christopher's tired enough to launch into another rant. Something like that, yeah. Like Hadrian has always cared about human beings. Hadrian is not political. And like neither am I, really, right? Like what I care about is human beings. And like to the extent that like ideas can help human beings, I care about those ideas. But like, if I need to put a person before a principle, right? Like maybe that's the Italian in me. I don't know. Like I will, right? And Hadrian feels the same. Hadrian surrounds himself with people he grew up, being told not to like, right? He married one functionally, right? And that's because people matter more than ideas. And so but like you also have to like work within the world, right? You can't overthrow it. Almost none of us can overthrow the world. Like you aren't possessed of the same sort of heroic will as like an Alexander or a Napoleon. Almost certainly nobody here is so vested. I certainly am not, right? And so what you have to do is figure out what you can do with where you are and how you are and care about people, despite their sins, despite their iniquities, and despite yours, right? Because like you're a mess too, right? Like you're not special. And so like I'm very mystified by this particular critique, right? That like I'm some sort of like jingo imperialist that the Redditors have confected for themselves. But it must be hard to do reason from inside of a Reddit account. So very frustrating. Very frustrating. Jared's not a mess. Jared's got it together though. Like he's figured out this whole thing. You just hit 300 subscribers, didn't you, Mitt? 300,000 subscribers. Jeez, I am tired. Congratulations. Thanks for being here. You know, Yeah. So, one of the weird things about these streams is how we'll swing from like this like very like serious conversation about the personal and the versus the political, and then someone will ask, "How do I rank the Berserk arcs?" The answer is like Golden Age, and then Millennium Falcon, and then maybe Conviction, and then Fantasia. I could kind of go either way on those. And we'll just do all of Conviction, Lost Children included, and then Black Swordsman last, I think. Um, so but no, it's tough too. I think Millennium Falcon is almost as good as which I am translating that way because it's funnier than Hawk of the Millennium or something. It's supposed to be Millennium Falcon, and it's much funnier that way. Millennium Falcon, I think, is almost as good as Golden Age. It's super close, super close. That whole arc is underpraised. It's very very good. I really like Serpico, so just having him around is a big plus for me. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit earlier. How do I decide what Hadrian tells the reader will happen? Some of it's like important, right? Like like the end of the story obviously is important, right? Um, but like a lot of it I just sort of it feels right in the moment. Like if we talk about we talk about like Hadrian's relationship with Pisander or something like that, So um yeah, if you liked Black Swordsman, it will only get better. Black Swordsman is pretty rough. It feels almost like a dry run for like the concept, like a rough draft in a way. And then everything after that is a lot more polished and sort of put together. At least we're talking about a manga series, Japanese comic series called Berserk that is rather gruesome. It's very it is very dark and unpleasant, but it is also not without hope, and just some really really excellent character work. It's a very grotesque art. It's like it's pulls a lot from like Geiger, but also from like Clive Barker and stuff for its demons, and from like Bosch, and like actually like whole panels from Bosch appear like in the comic book, which is kind of cool. But it can be pretty gross. So I always feel bad recommending it to people, but I think it is quite excellent. But it is very very unpleasant. Um, is there a preferred term for Sun Eater fans to call themselves? I don't think so. I don't think anybody has an official name. There is no Howler equivalent that I know of. Hieronymus Bosch, yes. Yes, Hieronymus Bosch. If people say Griffith did nothing wrong, can we say Sirianni did nothing wrong? I mean, you could. I did say Basander did nothing wrong earlier, but I meant that. So, I have a lot of sympathy for Basanderlin. But it may be that at least it is pretty yeah it is pretty that um but but it is very good, but it is definitely a little bit on the testosterone side of things, um for sure. um Do I prefer anime subbed or dubbed? If the dub is good, I prefer the dub. If the dub is bad, I would rather listen to the sub, um, or read the sub. Um, but if the dub is really good, like I can't watch Cowboy Bebop in Japanese, man. Like the dub is just too strong. Um, it just depends. It just depends. Lynn is still alive. Lynn is still alive as of the end of book 6. I don't. Is he in book 6? I don't think he's in book 6. I can't remember. Um, but he is still alive. What other anime and manga do I recommend? My favorite anime of all time, is Cowboy Bebop. Like I just said, I think it's a complete package. I think like narratively, it's amazing. I think artistically, it's amazing. The music is just off the charts. Um, A lot of like what I'm gonna say is like pretty obvious. Like I love Ghost in the Shell, right? I love Akira. I really love Psychopaths of like the last decade. I guess that was like 2012. So yeah, it's the last decade still. Really, it's the I think that was the best thing in my opinion. That first season was just so good. Do I like Avatar: The Last Airbender? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who doesn't? Did I watch the live action Cowboy Bebop? No. Why would I ever? Why would I ever? No, thank you. Am I still following the new Berserk after Mira's death? I think I could be a chapter or two behind. I don't know when they updated last. But yeah, I did. I really especially I like the sort of like non-chapter that Mori wrote about his friendship with Mira and about Mira's death and all that. I found that deeply affecting. You know, being someone who's like working on an ongoing project, right? Like the thought of dying with it unfinished is very painful to me personally. Um, and yeah, so having to like look at that, watching, learning that Mira had died, right, and watching the effect that had on the readers, right, but on his friends too, and like this particular friend who like basically had been given the job to finish his work. That was something that that really touched me. It was really a thing that I just sit and think about for a while. But I also think that the work they've done since then has been all right. It's been very threadbare, and I think they might end up kind of rushing it. But I think it would be okay just to sort of see what the full scope of the plan was. I don't think it feels, like Maury said that he was not going to put anything in the continuing Berserk, right, that he wasn't 100% sure was part of Mira's vision. And I think that's true. I think it feels that way. It doesn't feel like, one of these people who comes in and like, makes a mess and sort of puts their own ideas in. It feels very faithful. It just feels threadbare. But I don't think it's bad. I think, we know where it really ends. It ends with that shot of Griffith crying, which I think is an amazing last panel, from Mira himself. So no, I'm gonna keep reading and expect it to just not be quite the same. So all right. All right. Elise says it's time for me to go. It is actually time. It is 10 o'clock. So it is time to wrap these things up. So I guess I will see you all again soon. I'll try to get one in probably a little bit earlier in December since we've got the holidays. I don't want to try to do this right on top of Christmas because I have, stuff to do, right? But I do want to make sure we get it in. It'll either be that or actually I could do it closer to New Year's. That might be better too. But we'll get it in before the end of the year. I'll see y'all one more time before 2025. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, farewell.